BlackRock naming the CEO of Aramco, Amin Nasser, to its board. The world's largest asset manager has been a proponent of the financial industry's adoption of ESG strategies. BlackRock says the move will give it a unique perspective on key issues. Joining us now to talk about the decision is Jeff Sonnenfeld, Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale University School of Management, as well as a CNBC contributor. On face value, Jeff, it's good to see you, but on face value, BlackRock's global. They do have a presence in the Middle East. I could almost accept that, you can't change the world because you can't change the world in one fell swoop. Being part of it, being part of the process, maybe you work from within and maybe affect an improvement in things that you see in the world. Do you dismiss this out of hand as a smart move for Larry Fink and BlackRock?
I dismiss this out of hand, but not for the reasoning you said. I share your perspective as a globalist. I don't share your perspective on appeasement always being the right way to go, or the current term for it is constructive engagement. That often doesn't work. But in particular, the Saudis are entitled to a voice on this board. They've got $1 trillion invested in there. I think they're entitled to a voice, but not this guy. Amin Nasser might be a delightful person, but symbolically and substantively representing Aramco, that is the wrong player here, unless Larry Fink really wants to blur their image on the ESG front, and that's pretty good. But Aramco has not been in support of U.S. policies. They have been undermining the allies, whether or not it's to help Putin with these completely unjustified production cuts. I mean, they're cutting their nose to spite their face. They've cut about the 4 billion barrels a day of production in the last 10 months, completely unjustified, unless they either want to help Putin or try to hurt the Biden economy, or Lord knows what they want to do, make up for their failed investments elsewhere as they've tried to diversify. And that's been a fiasco for them. And from the Vision Fund to NEOM has been disastrous. So whatever their motives are, it's not in our interests. And it's because of these misguided motives that we've actually cut the $100 billion, actually put a pause on an unparalleled $100 billion weapons transfer of highly sensitive systems to the Saudis for full control.
I mean, Jeff, so if it was just a hydrocarbon producer, the biggest in the world, but didn't have all of this history of being against our interests, the United States, then would it be okay, or is it? Because then I think we get into the whole issue of China and how companies should be negotiating that or walking that fine line. Because a lot of things that China, and it's weird for me watching you over the months, Jeff, in terms of Russia, how strident you've been. You don't speak out against China the same way. I don't really understand that.
Well, if the topic today is Saudi, I'm not opposed to Saudi. I'm opposed to Aramco being represented, given the misconduct of Aramco. And I've shared this with a couple of board members on the Aramco board. That's a problem. If China, by the way, has been surprisingly supportive of, in some ways, of what we're doing in Russia. In fact, the largest, some of the largest petrochemical companies, Sinochem and Sinopec, on February 24th of last year, they cut all ties immediately. The largest banks in China, several of them, from Bank of China to ICBC, larger than virtually any bank we have on this airways, they cut all ties with China right away. And thankfully, so far, they're not supplying any great extent weapons to Russia. But yeah, but the issue here being Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's misconduct. They're not on our side. Frankly, they're not on their own side. If Larry Fink wanted to give them good investment advice, he'd tell them don't cut the production because it's cost them hundreds of billions of dollars themselves. There's nobody following. Yes.
But here's the thing that I can't figure out about this decision this morning, which is, for the last 5 and 10 years, you saw Larry Fink and you saw BlackRock very aggressively talk about ESG, and in particular climate. In fact, I remember doing an interview with him where he talked about climate and carbon as being one of the central issues of his life. He then gets tortured in the last 2 years torched really by the right, GOP states that decide we're not going to do business with you under these conditions. It appears to some degree he is now placating that group, and I imagine may shoot himself in the foot again on the other side. And what I fear is that people are going to think that this firm has just flip-flopped from one side to the other side, and just whatever the wind is blowing today is the way we're going.
I couldn't agree with you more, Andrew. He clearly is swinging like a pendulum here. It's got to be confusing a lot of people. I mean, there are several, absolutely, there are excesses and opportunists who hijacked the, quote, ESG cause. It got blurred. We have 1,600 mutual funds and private equity funds that are chasing ESG designated investments. 1,600, there are only 5,000 public companies. It's absurd. A lot of them are ridiculous. But in this case, he's got, I guess, about $1 trillion that are dedicated to ESG out of the $9 trillion that BlackRock has. So they're not purely defined by this, and there's plenty of choice. He's opened up choice to investors whether or not they want to go down, how they want to vote on the referenda. So BlackRock's been great on that front. However, the Saudis, and in particular, they're entitled to a Saudi voice, a Saudi seat, but not this company. This is the exact wrong company. So, and not just on the fossil fuel issue, just on where they are in undermining U.S. policy, undermining the allies on all fronts, which is why the United States government has cut off these. They were getting THAAD missiles, Patriot missiles. They were not just getting full operational control. We were manufacturing them, 100% manufacturing them in Saudi Arabia and giving them financial control and the intellectual property control. All of our allies combined didn't have a deal like that we gave them in 2017. The same year, by the way, that 500 Saudis were imprisoned in the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton and shaken down for almost $1 trillion and some reportedly tortured, with there being no trials, any public trials over all this. This is who our business partner is, not even getting into the Khashoggi deal, of course, which was, the murder 1 year later. And that Davos in the desert, just as a parallel, I happen to like Larry Fink, but Andrew, you were the first to pull out of the Davos in the desert. And forgive me for saying this, but and I'm not pandering, it just happens to be a fact. I think you triggered that a very important statement of the global business community when you pulled out. Everybody followed. Jamie Dimon, everybody, except Larry Fink was the last. You were the first, he was the last. And I just think there's a concern here.